General Hospital spoilers reveal that Brennan had made a decision that he believed would secure everything he had been carefully constructing. He was going to propose to Carly. In his mind, it was the ultimate checkmate, a move that would bind her to him emotionally and psychologically before the truth could tear them apart. He had spent weeks crafting the illusion of a stable, charming relationship, planting seeds of trust, showering her with attention, and painting a future that glittered with false sincerity. The ring was chosen. The words were rehearsed. The moment was being staged with precision. But what Brennan didn't anticipate was that Carly had already uncovered the truth. And not just any truth, the kind that shattered illusions. The kind that ignited fury, the kind that made proposals feel like weapons rather than promises. Carly knew everything now. She knew about the WSB recruitment. She knew how Brennan had manipulated Josslyn, how he had watched her grief and channeled it into violence, steering her directly into the path of Cyrus. She knew about the files, the surveillance. The cold, calculated way Brennan had positioned her daughter as a tool. And perhaps most unforgivably, she knew that while Joss was being dragged into the shadows of espionage, Brennan had been standing in her kitchen, kissing her lips, lying through his teeth. What he didn't know was that every moment she spent with him now was an act, her own performance. Played with chilling restraint, masking the rising storm beneath her calm exterior. This was no longer a love story. It was war in slow motion. The proposal, to Brennan, was meant to stabilize the cracks he feared were forming. He sensed Carly pulling away, not physically, but emotionally. Her gaze had shifted. Her questions became sharper. But he mistook it for nerves, wedding pressure, maybe even trauma resurfacing from past heartbreaks. He didn't realize that Carly was already arming herself with knowledge. She had spoken to Anna. She had pieced together the timeline. She had seen the footage, read the reports, and confronted the silence in Josslyn's eyes that spoke louder than any confession. Carly had been betrayed before. But this was different. This wasn't about her heart. This was about her child. And that kind of betrayal doesn't break a woman like Carly. It builds a fire that no one walks away from unscathed. As Brennan plotted the perfect moment, a candlelit table, a private rooftop, perhaps even the same place where they'd first kissed, Carly plotted something else. She began rehearsing her own lines. Not for acceptance, but for exposure. She imagined the look on his face when she would drop Sam's name. When she'd reveal that she knew how deeply he'd buried the truth about Joss's WSB involvement. When she'd explain, in brutal clarity, how every touch, every whisper of affection had become a haunting reminder of what he'd taken from her. What Brennan couldn't possibly grasp was how obsessed Carly had become, not with him, but with uncovering every rotten corner of his lies. She wasn't just angry. She was haunted. The very idea that she had trusted him, let him into her life, all while he was using her daughter like a pawn in a global chess match, it made her skin crawl. And yet, she waited. She let him believe he still had the upper hand. She smiled when he flirted. She played along when he hinted at a future. Because Carly wasn't going to lash out in rage, she was going to strike with precision. This twisted emotional dance was tearing her apart inside. Every day she had to pretend. Every moment she stood across from him and pretended to love the man who had risked her daughter's life, was another thread pulled from her soul. And yet, she endured it. Because the moment Brennan dropped to one knee, the moment he exposed his last shred of vulnerability in front of her, she would have all the power. And she intended to use it. Josslyn, meanwhile, was beginning to feel the shift too. Though she didn't know the full extent of Brennan's betrayal, she sensed that something in her mother had changed. Carly had become more protective, more measured. She hovered around Joss with a careful balance of concern and strategic silence, clearly waiting for something. And Joss, still recovering from the psychological damage of being used by the WSB, began to question whether the man who had once promised to help her heal had been the architect of her suffering all along. When the proposal finally comes, and it won't be the climax of a love story. It will be the start of a reckoning. Brennan will kneel, present the ring. speak the words he believes will bind Carly to him. But instead of tears, he will be met with a gaze so cold, so unrelenting, that it will freeze him where he stands. Carly won't scream. She won't cry. She will dismantle him, brick by brick, word by word, exposing every lie he's told, every truth he's buried, every manipulation he thought he had hidden. And when she's done, she will not say yes. She will walk away, not just from Brennan, but from the entire false reality he tried to build around her. This isn't just a story of heartbreak. It's a story of awakening. Of obsession turned inside out. Of a woman who was once deceived but now stands in absolute clarity. Brennan's proposal was meant to solidify his power. Instead, it will become the moment he loses everything. Because Carly is no longer the woman he thought he could control. She is the woman who will destroy him. And in doing so, she will reclaim her daughter. Her dignity, and the truth. No ring, no lies, and no twisted illusion of love will stop her now. Carly had faced betrayal before. She had endured heartbreak, deceit, and loss. But nothing could have prepared her for the moment she discovered the devastating truth, that Brennan wasn't just manipulating her and Josslyn, he was connected to a much darker secret. One that involved Drew in a way she never imagined. The web of lies Brennan had spun was far wider, far more calculated than she ever suspected. And now, everything had changed. What began as a gnawing suspicion turned into a full-blown revelation when Carly stumbled upon confidential WSB files she shouldn't have had access to. But ones she'd found thanks to a whisper from Anna and a trail Brennan hadn't covered as well as he thought. Inside them were reports, timelines, and operation logs. But what struck Carly like a lightning bolt was one file marked with Drew's name, a mission gone wrong, a casualty list from the island in Greece. And confirmation that the man who had returned to Port Charles wasn't the Drew she once knew. Drew had died. The man now walking beside her, the man Brennan had propped up, defended. And embedded in her life, was a lie. And Brennan had known all along. This was no longer just about Josslyn or the WSB. This was personal. Brennan hadn't just manipulated her daughter, he had desecrated the memory of someone Carly had loved, someone she believed had survived unthinkable torment only to come home broken but real. Now she knew better. She knew Brennan had allowed this imposter to rise, had given him Drew's face, his name, his legacy. And Carly felt her entire world collapse beneath the weight of that betrayal. And Brennan, oblivious to the storm forming around him, had been preparing for the most elaborate performance of all, his proposal. He had planned every detail, the ring, the setting. The rehearsed words, the illusion of love meant to pull Carly deeper into his web. But what he didn't know was that Carly had already declared war. The day he intended to seal their future was the day she intended to burn his to the ground. Carly didn't wait. She didn't play coy. She attacked. Before Brennan could even kneel. Before he could slide the velvet box from his pocket, Carly confronted him, fierce, unflinching, and with the fire of every mother, lover, and warrior he had underestimated. She laid it all out. His recruitment of Josslyn, his manipulation through the WSB, his silence while Joss was thrown into danger. And the ultimate betrayal, his role in covering up Drew's death and replacing him with a puppet. Each word was a dagger. Each accusation a public execution of the persona Brennan had so carefully constructed. Brennan's world crumbled in real time. What was meant to be a carefully choreographed moment of affection turned into a nightmare. Carly's voice rose, sharp and clear, echoing off the walls of the Metro Court. Exposing him in front of witnesses who had once believed in his charm. Brennan stood frozen, the ring in his hand now a useless token, his lies unraveling with each breath Carly took. She called him a coward. A deceiver. A monster hiding behind tailored suits and shallow flattery. She didn't give him a chance to speak, because no words could undo what he had done. Not to her. Not to Joss. Not to Drew's memory. The guests and staff around them didn't know what to do, some froze in shock, others whispered behind trembling hands. But Carly didn't care. This was no longer about appearances. This was about justice. About truth. About ensuring that Brennan would never again twist another life into his agenda. Brennan's carefully laid plans, months of seduction, strategy, and manipulation, disintegrated in a matter of minutes. He had believed he was in control. He had believed Carly was his. But now, stripped of every lie, he stood exposed, powerless, and watched as the woman he thought he could conquer turned into the very force that destroyed him. Carly walked away from the proposal not with regret, but with clarity. She didn't look back. She didn't waver. And Brennan, for all his calculated charm and dangerous secrets, realized too late that he hadn't just lost her, he had created his own downfall. The proposal that was meant to mark the beginning of a new chapter became a tombstone for his ambitions. And as the echoes of Carly's voice faded into silence, Brennan stood alone in the wreckage, knowing that this was only the beginning of his ruin. The truth always finds a way to rise, and this time, it arrived in the form no one could have predicted: Britt. Her sudden return to Port Charles was already a seismic shift. But what she carried with her was something far more powerful than a reunion or a redemption arc. She brought secrets. Dangerous, damning secrets. And at the heart of them all was Brennan. In a confidential conversation behind locked doors, Britt finally revealed the full extent of the crimes Brennan had committed under the guise of diplomacy, security, and charm. What she knew wasn't speculation, it was evidence. First-hand knowledge of the horrific things he had done while operating under the WSB's shadow. She spoke of covert missions that weren't meant to save lives but to silence them. Of experiments carried out under Brennan's command. Of operatives like Josslyn being manipulated and placed in peril for the sake of testing loyalty. She revealed that Brennan hadn't just recruited vulnerable minds like Joss, he had psychologically broken some of them, including young agents forced into morally gray missions with no support. No exit strategy, and no understanding of the cost. And worst of all, Britt disclosed how Brennan had stood by when the real Drew died, choosing not to intervene. Choosing instead to help orchestrate the identity theft that followed, an act so vile, so twisted, that even seasoned operatives within the WSB had gone silent in protest. When Britt shared these truths with Carly, it wasn't just a moment of shock, it was ignition. The information didn't simply disgust Carly. It enraged her. It consumed her. Every detail, every calculated act of betrayal, built a fury inside her that no one could temper. Brennan hadn't just manipulated her daughter. He hadn't just desecrated the memory of Drew. He had left scars on people who would never heal, and now Carly carried those scars as her own. Her hatred wasn't loud at first. It was cold. Focused. Controlled. But it grew with every hour. The images of what Britt described played like a nightmare reel in her head, Josslyn being dragged into darkness, Drew being replaced by a puppet, innocent lives becoming collateral damage. And the man responsible had dared to stand beside her, to pretend he loved her, to plan a future with her while hiding every sin behind a polished smile. What began as heartbreak transformed into obsession. Carly couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. She replayed every interaction with Brennan through this new lens, every hug, every kiss, every whisper. Each memory now felt like a betrayal etched into her skin. Her mind spiraled into a relentless need for justice, but more than that, for vengeance. Not just for herself. For Drew. For Josslyn. For every name on Britt's list of the forgotten and discarded. And what haunted her most was the realization that she had let this man get so close, that she had almost said yes to a future built on horror. Britt's return, once seen as a curiosity, became the tipping point in Carly's unraveling. The grief she'd buried after losing Drew resurfaced tenfold. The rage she'd controlled when Joss first got involved with the WSB now erupted with clarity. And the love she once felt for Brennan turned to something poisonous, a seething, obsessive hatred that burned through every word he'd ever spoken. This wasn't just revenge anymore. It was war. And Carly was no longer interested in exposing Brennan privately. She wanted the world to see what he truly was. She wanted every lie stripped away, every ally of his to scatter, and every soul he had hurt to know that he was finally paying the price. With Britt by her side, armed with evidence, testimony, and personal accounts, Carly began laying the groundwork for the public downfall of the man who had tried to destroy everything she held dear. And Brennan, sensing that something had shifted, grew more desperate. He tried to reach Carly, to explain, to charm his way back into control. But it was too late. Carly's eyes no longer saw him as a man, only as a monster cloaked in civility. Every word he spoke sounded like a lie. Every move he made felt like a trap. The obsession she now carried wasn't about love or grief. It was about power. About taking it back. About making sure Brennan never touched another life again. What Britt had revealed wasn't just a list of crimes, it was the key to unlocking a fury Carly had never fully unleashed. And now that she had, there was no going back. Brennan had created an enemy he couldn't charm, a storm he couldn't outrun. The obsession now consuming Carly was not one of passion, but of justice sharpened into vengeance. And it was only just beginning. Carly was no longer just a woman betrayed. She had become a mother on the edge of war, relentless, instinctive, and terrifying in her resolve. Ever since Britt revealed the horrifying truths about Brennan, his recruitment of Josslyn, his role in Drew's death, his manipulation through the WSB, Carly's world had collapsed into a singular mission, to protect her daughter at all costs. The woman who once sought peace and healing through a new relationship was now consumed by something far darker. This wasn't about heartbreak anymore. This was about survival. And what Carly saw wasn't a proposal from Brennan, it was an ambush. What she felt wasn't romance, it was betrayal laced with threat. And now, with her daughter in the crosshairs of an invisible war, Carly was ready to burn everything down. Every move she made from that moment on became part of her personal campaign to tear Brennan's influence out of their lives. She secretly met with Britt late at night, gathering every shred of evidence. She accessed encrypted WSB files through back channels, contacted former allies in dark corners of Port Charles, and even reached out to Anna for quiet guidance. Carly didn't sleep. She barely ate. Her mind ran in loops of fear and fury, haunted by the image of Josslyn sitting in a room, unknowingly manipulated. Used like a pawn in a global game orchestrated by the very man who claimed to love Carly. The hardest part wasn't the secrets. It was watching her daughter continue to live in that illusion, unaware that Brennan had been the architect of every dark twist in her path. Carly knew she had to tread carefully. Josslyn was already fragile, already carrying guilt and confusion about her involvement with Cyrus and the WSB. If Carly dropped everything on her at once, the emotional destruction could be permanent. But if she waited too long, Brennan might strike again. Might pull Joss in deeper. Might break her completely. The war between Carly and Brennan wasn't public, yet. But it was escalating behind closed doors. Carly began documenting everything, setting traps in conversations, recording Brennan's subtle tells. She pushed him emotionally, questioned his loyalty with calculated softness, studied his reactions for signs of instability or fear. Every polite smile she gave him was a mask. Every touch was a weapon. Brennan, once so smug in his control, began to sense something slipping. And when he did, his charm turned to aggression. He became more possessive. More controlling. More dangerous. Carly saw it all. And it only made her more determined. What began as maternal protection evolved into a full-scale psychological chess match. Carly couldn't go to the police, not yet. The WSB was still shadowy, unpredictable, and Brennan had allies in places she couldn't even see. But what she could do was dismantle his credibility. Isolate him, expose him bit by bit until he stood alone, stripped of all his false power. And as she worked, she built her own silent army. Britt. Anna. Spinelli. Even Dante began to quietly circle. Sensing something deeper was unfolding behind the scenes. But the deeper Carly dug, the more horrifying the truth became. There were other names, other young agents like Joss who had disappeared. Been discarded, or pushed past their limits under Brennan's silent orders. What had happened to them? Where were they now? The thought kept Carly awake at night, fists clenched. Breath caught in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for her daughter anymore. She was fighting for every soul this man had used and thrown away like strategy pieces. And then, the unthinkable. Josslyn began to suspect something was wrong. She found a classified document Carly had hidden. She overheard fragments of a conversation between her and Britt. And she confronted Carly with a mixture of fear and disbelief. At first, Carly tried to deflect, to protect Joss from the emotional fallout. But when she looked into her daughter's eyes, she saw the pain of someone already spiraling, already lost in the fog Brennan had created. She couldn't lie anymore. She told Joss everything. The truth crushed Josslyn. She broke down. Devastated that she had trusted Brennan, that she had unknowingly become a weapon in his hands. She sobbed not just from betrayal, but from the guilt of having allowed him into their lives. Carly held her, her own tears silent, and promised that none of this was Joss's fault, that Brennan had chosen this path, and now he would pay for it. The war exploded after that. Josslyn wanted to go public. Carly refused, not yet. They had to be smart. They had to be surgical. Brennan was still dangerous, still connected. If they moved too fast, he could disappear. Or worse, retaliate. So Carly set the final stage. She scheduled a private dinner with Brennan, played the loving partner one last time, and invited him to talk about the future. What he didn't know was that the future she had in mind didn't include him. As Brennan arrived, confident and poised, Carly stood calm and composed, but this time, not alone. Britt waited in the next room, evidence in hand. Dante was stationed outside. And Josslyn, though shaken, had finally reclaimed her voice. Carly looked Brennan in the eye and said the words he never expected, "You're done." Everything unraveled. He tried to deny it. To manipulate. To threaten. But Carly didn't flinch. Her obsession had become purpose. Her love had become armor. And her rage had become a weapon. She laid it all out, every lie, every manipulation, every sin. And when Brennan finally realized there was no way out, no room left to twist the story, all that remained was silence. The war was over. And Carly had won. But the cost was heavy. The emotional wreckage left behind in Josslyn would take time to heal. The betrayal she carried would not fade quickly. Carly knew that. But for the first time in weeks, she could breathe, not because the danger was gone, but because she had fought for her daughter. And in doing so, she had reclaimed her own strength, her own clarity, her own peace. And Brennan? He had tried to destroy everything Carly loved. He had underestimated the heart of a mother. And now, he would never forget what happened when Carly finally struck back.